I trust you all had a good dinner and or a good sleep last night. I'd like to go ahead and just get started this morning. The first session up for today is going to be an overview of our identity management strategy. So given that, we have brought over Kim Cameron, who is an architect in the group that is focusing on our identity management solutions. And he is basically on tap for quite a while, actually, up until about 11 o'clock. We'll be cutting loose, sort of part way through around 10:45. We'll take a break, allow people to catch their breath and what have you, and then finish off by 11 o'clock. But with that, why don't we go ahead and get things rolling? So I'd like to turn it over to Kim.
Thank you. Okay, I'm the architect of identity and access these days. So just to give you an idea of how this fits into the organization, that involves Active Directory, what we call Microsoft Identity Integration Services, which is our meta-directory and integration platform, basically ways of using business processes in management of identity. And a new product called Active Directory Federation Server, which is our way of breaking down and allowing communication across organization and technical boundaries, sort of web-based approach. And you know, a number of sort of associated little things. And some new technologies that I'm going to talk about for today and that are really quite very much under non-disclosure at this point. So, and I'm also going to be giving a presentation that I've never given before. Since we really aren't in the mode where we're discussing this with people you know, externally. So I hope you'll bear with me, and but they tell me you're a really tough audience, so I'm looking forward to it. Really tough audience on a first presentation is terrific. But it's not as though I'm new to the problem area, so you can throw stones. Okay. I think, you know, I think everybody in this room is probably very familiar with the situation, so I'm not going to go into great depth. But our users are have experienced password fatigue. Saturation, they've been taken to the saturation point as their use of the internet expands. It's just impossible to maintain discrete passwords and identities and try and get some kind of a coherent sense of who you are where and retain that, unless you're really, really, really dedicated to it as kind of a second job. And secondly, there is the problem of attacks on the identity infrastructure has gone from sort of the hobbyist to the professional. So we see, you know, an increasing, and I've been working very closely, you know, with the big websites like, you know, Yahoo, eBay, and all these people, trying to make sure that we come to a technology that will really work across wide number of contexts. And, you know, we're now at the point where there's an international cartels mounting these attacks and able to hire computer scientists much more cheaply than Microsoft can in various third world countries where there really aren't other opportunities for employment. And to be able to organize themselves on an international scale so that they can resell identities and protect themselves. And so we've moved from phishing to, you know, and I think everybody knows what phishing is. We're moving towards what is now being called farming. And so farming is where you actually either put code on the platform or attack the DNS system itself in such a way that you can redirect people to locations where you can better fleece them. Okay, and we see these capabilities. We see what they're developing. So, for example, a few of the cognoscenti have been taught to understand the so-called lock icon at the bottom of the Internet Explorer. But that lock icon can easily be overwritten by software installed on your machine. Even, in fact, it's trivial to do so at the present time. With a little more effort, you can overwrite the location bar. So that, you think you're visiting one location when you're visiting another. So you can replace since the dialogues around certificates are so incredibly clear, no, I'm joking, obtuse, it's very easy to get people to replace them with more, with DLLs that are much more conducive to the requirements of the criminal elements. So basically, we see not only, we're also at another cliff here, where our, where our technologies are being bypassed by those who aren't to replace them. I know I'm going too slow because I'm going to come to my 20-minute period, and you guys are going to be able to all jump on me, and I won't have said anything yet. But I do think it's important to sort of go through this and for you to understand that we understand these issues. Am I right, or am I going way too slow, or what? I'm okay? I can speed up a bit.
No, slow down.
I have to wake up first.
All right, 20 pieces up.
Okay, I don't know the extent to which you guys are aware of the farming thing, so I just wanted to go in there a little bit. I mean, we're extremely concerned about this. Next, there's the heightened sensitivity to privacy and tracking, which is really a good thing to the extent that it means that people are thinking about who they are in the digital realm. Identity is, see, I'm speeding up here. I'm not going to go into that. Identity is recognized by the CXO as a top business problem. So this is a huge change. 5 years ago, 3 years ago, we couldn't get people to see identity as even something that existed on as a business problem. It was really a technology problem. And therefore, it was impossible to solve it or to get people mobilized to solve it. And finally, because of the sort of this other dynamic of the evolution of web services, the evolution of new technologies built on them, we have an increasing demand for federated applications, for the ability to have federated identity, and that completely changes the ballpark again. So you see a number of dynamics all working simultaneously to completely restructure this field of endeavor. And that's what we're trying to respond to, and you'll see that our response is therefore fairly complex and global. I mean, it's complex in the sense that we have to, not in the sense that the technologies are complex necessarily, but that we have to deal with a number of different things, that we need a holistic solution as opposed to some kind of a Band-Aid. What we don't need is another security bar on, in my opinion, okay, this is Kim Cameron speaking for one moment, we don't need another security bar on the browser. We need something much, much deeper and more holistic to solve this problem. And I'm not saying a security bar in the browser is bad, because I'm sure we're producing one somewhere at Microsoft. So those of us working on this, and myself on my website, I began, which is www.identityblog.com, began a conversation a while ago on what I called, and yes, it was a device, was a device in order to mobilize people, the laws of identity, in order to gain a large amount, in order to try and get a number of people involved in this discussion. And what we did, and my thinking here was based on looking at all of the systems that have been deployed that we know about, which is quite a few since we've been around for a while, and say, what was wrong with them? Where did they work? Where didn't they work? Okay, so I wanted to put together a set of laws, or one can call them principles, which explained the success and failure of systems. So I don't see these as moral things. I don't see these as legal things. I'm looking at it purely as a computer scientist from the point of view of success of systems. So this is a different perspective. It's not as though I'm saying, this is good or this is bad. I'm saying people will reject the system or accept the system, or some people will accept it or reject it based on these premises. And so let me go through some of these and explain some of my thinking here. The first is the law of control. Now, people will recognize that a number of these things are premises articulated by many people in the privacy and security area. So I'm not claiming originality here. I'm simply claiming a set of things that must be simultaneously solved in order for us to move forward. So the first is a matter of what I call the law of control, that if we build an identity system, it must only reveal information identifying the user with the user's consent. In other words, when we build systems that sort of surreptitiously or behind the scenes identify the user, several things go wrong. One is, if the user finds out about it, the user can get upset. And another thing that happens is that the user doesn't understand what's going on. And if the user doesn't understand what's going on, he can be led into, or she can be led into situations where they do things that are really damaging. So we need to move towards a system where the user has control. Secondly, that solutions built on minimal disclosure are more likely to be stable and long-term and immune to attack than systems built on maximal disclosure or large disclosure. So, for example, if I build a system in which my social security number is used to look up my taste, my previous record of listening to music, in order that a system could determine, consuming service could determine what music to play for me, for example, then, and I'm exposing something of very high value, like an identifier such as the social security number, that makes that whole system, much more attractive as a target for attack than if that system only released somehow my particular immediate preference in music. Like, I want to hear Tom Jones, my favorite. Anyway, so the idea there then is we have to build the system, our systems, to do minimal disclosure, and in that way reduce risk. It's just simple prudence in terms of risk reduction. Now, the third law is the law of fewest parties. And people asked me to talk a bit about what we learned out of Passport. So let me just take a slight detour here and say that our approach, we now see Passport as an authentication system for the MSN properties. All right, so we no longer see Passport as an authentication system for use by the entire world in order to, as sort of a repository of identity that would be used on a world basis. We see it as a way of organizing our own house, MSN. And if you look at the way that Passport, if you look at this whole experience with Passport, it was very interesting because Microsoft was one of the first parties to really get involved in identity and in trying to deal with setting up an identity system. And we really learned a lot through that experience. One of the things you can see with Passport is that it was very, very successful to the extent that people recognized the role of Microsoft in the identity relationship. All right? So there was never a complaint about the role of Passport in Kim Cameron using Hotmail or anyone else. When it came to Microsoft brokering somebody's identity when they went to a third-party site, there was a lot of pushback on that. And in my view, we look at that and we've discussed with all of the parties involved. We've interviewed users, we've interviewed site operators and so on. And basically, the site operators, I say we've interviewed. It's more than interviewed. We've been harangued by, we've been deeply involved with. The site operators don't want Microsoft in the middle of their relationship with their customer. Right? So what you need is an identity system based on the actual context and in which the parties in that relationship are well known to, or make sense to each other. You don't want extraneous parties in there. Next is the law of directed identity. We've often had a paradigm that assumes both the individual involved in consuming a service and the service itself are basically peers of each other, when in fact we can really say that the service is usually something which is public, and the consumption of the service is something that is private. So for example, the existence of Amazon is well known. Amazon is a public site. Kim Cameron's use of Amazon is not a matter which I expect to be public information. And so what we really need is for Amazon to have a public identity, which all of us can understand and employ, whereas when we're visiting Amazon, to have a private identity, in other words, something which is used for that particular activity. Whereas when I go to Barnes & Noble, there's no need for that to be the same identity. I am not functioning in a public fashion in going to these places. I may choose to release the correlation between who I am at Barnes & Noble and who I am at Amazon. But that's my decision, and I should not be required to do it by the system itself, by the structure or architecture of the identity system that we put in place, because I want to come back to the fact that these are all principles that should guide how we design the system itself. I'll give you another example, which the Bluetooth bomb. So when you're walking along with a Bluetooth phone, that phone is continuously broadcasting a fixed identity. So, for example, if there were somebody who wanted to harm me, it would be possible to build a bomb or an explosive device or something like that that tuned into this continuously broadcast identifier, and when the identifier was close enough, was detonated. And you can. This is a really extreme example, but not an impossible one in today's world. And there are many other attacks, less dramatic in scope, but nonetheless, which represent a danger. So this is another example of where, if I have a Bluetooth phone, it should be, first of all, deciding which public entities it wants to communicate with, and secondly, coming up with pairwise identifiers that can be used with each public identity that it contacts. So if it wants to speak to a Coke machine at one end of a mall and I don't know, some other machine at the other end of the mall, it doesn't have to use the same identifier. So we need to be able to distinguish between these two kinds of identifiers and where they would be used. Next is the law of human integration. Humans have been left out of the equation, so you have systems that we've developed which work fine for the first 5,000 miles. You know, between the server and my computer, it can be proven that there is no person in the middle. But for that last 3 feet between my computer and my head, it's perfectly possible to put a man in the middle through the spyware and all of these other mechanisms that we talked about in terms of farming. And why is that? That's because the user was not considered to be a part of the system. We have to factor and imagine the user as a part of the system and say, what are the communication capabilities of the user? Just as we would say, what are the communications capability of this server? And we have to build mechanisms. We shouldn't be imagining what these capabilities are. We should be studying and verifying through really scientific mechanisms, verifying that we are able to communicate, that we have a reliable communications channel from the computer to the user. So that means, that it's understandable the user is in a state machine and understands how to respond. Secondly, it means that the user is in a protected environment in that machine. And then the last point I'll make here is the law of context. There is not one identity that is applicable to all contexts. Or let me rephrase that. We should not build an identity system built on the assumption that there is one identity applicable to all contexts. We must, and once again, one of the main fears is that if one breaks these laws, then the users say, well, I don't like this identity system, I'm going to employ another identity system. And if they employ another identity system, then everything starts to unravel, because first of all, this problem of law number 6, integrating the user into the system so they understand what's going on, becomes completely impossible once you have a multiplicity of systems. And secondly, it's impossible for them to understand what's going on. It's impossible to protect it. It's impossible to do all of these things. So this represents really a set of interlocking, I think of them as design constraints on our systems going forward. I forgot the law of pluralism, and it's the most important law. And the reason I did that is because, it's my favorite law, and the law of pluralism is that there is not one system. There is not, the only single system that you can build, and so this is, here I'm asking you to think, deeply about this. The only system you can build is a meta-system. So there will always be individual identity technologies. And in fact, we want new identity technologies. We want to be able to innovate and add new identity technologies, especially as we're attacked. If we build a system that is rigid and in which we can't add new technologies, then we can't respond to the professionalization of the attacks on our identity systems. So we need elasticity in the system. We need expansion joints. It's like when you build a bridge, you need to be able to respond to changes in temperature and so on. We need flexibility within the system, and so just for that reason alone, it has to be a meta-system. But also there are many useful existing systems and system ideas. So we have Kerberos, we have PKI, we have SAML, we have Liberty. We have, a bunch of things that have strong capabilities that we need to be able to integrate into this unified system, and then we can look at things like new types of identity systems coming out of the university community, that have very interesting properties. Uh-oh, I've missed my 20 minutes. Yep.
Yeah, it's 30 minutes now.
Okay.
So I only have a question of clarification, which is your law of...
I'm sorry, he did start 10 minutes late, though, right?
Okay, I'm right on time.
I me help you.
Your last law of, what did you call it?
Context.
Is that similar to a single person having multiple roles and each role having an identity?
Yeah. But also, for example, as an individual, I might have, for dealing with my family, I might have some just informal identity, but nonetheless strong. For dealing with people in my capacity as an architect and a, as a computer science person, then I would Microsoft issues me an identity, which I think all of you would relate to more than my own personal, asserted one. And then when it comes to being a citizen, my government would issue me an identity. But I wouldn't necessarily want to use my government-issued identity when I went gambling in Vegas or something like that. So it's you have different identities that are used in different contexts. Now then, just let me go one step further. So then if you get to a complex role environment like, say, the military, where you have different identities. I mean, the military is a very good example where, in battle, you have a different identity than you do when you're sort of on your base in a normal environment, okay? And you take on the specific command, specific role depending on your function, okay? So, okay, sorry.
No, I was just. There are multiple roles, there are multiple contexts, and I wanted to know whether you were identifying these or whether you can allow multiple roles per context, et cetera. And so that's just really the point.
I think you can. I think you have to. It's many to many.
Then what's missing is a law of roles.
Well, okay, yes. Okay, so I am very interested in your concepts about what is missing, and I would like you to write to me.
But the other thing I wanted to say is that if you're on your third slide and we're to
I'll speed up. I'll speed up. But these laws, I believe these are important because they explain the thinking that is behind what we've built. Okay? Yeah.
Just a comment to add on, which is the following. What we really need at this point is policies about which identity has to be used. Some of those policies we really, some might be specified by the individuals the identity refers to, but in other cases they can be specified by the organization.
Yes.
So I wonder whether you have been considering also this aspect of the...
Yes, and so the organization would be an identity provider, all right? And now I'll come to the problems of roles and everything else, okay? So, and I will speed up.
I actually want to, I think, kind of build on there. The notion, it's slightly semantic, but I think it's important. The notion of people issuing you identities just strikes me as wrong, right? You issue credentials. You don't issue identities, right? In most contexts, maybe as a birth certificate, we can say that the state has issued me an identity, but I actually would suggest that my parents claimed an identity for me that the state then gives me a credential to prove, right? And then I think that becomes important when you start to think about, you've used the term identifiers and identity, you've used authenticate, you haven't used authorized, and I think it all kind of plays back into Jeff Freiberg's stuff yesterday, the notion that to the extent possible we want people to be thinking about authorization and perhaps
I will come to that.
Role-based, not, I actually, the whole notion of people having multiple identities and being lots of, we want to have multiple ways to represent ourselves and to interact in very limited ways that don't require us to reveal it.
Who is going to make the assertions about what you are, about what your attributes are, your claims are, in a given context?
Or who are people going to rely on to verify your assertion of your credentials?
Well, it's the same thing, yeah.
Maybe.
And those are going to be different when you're dealing with different parties, which is part of what I'm trying to say. So you need the elasticity to have that. I agree totally with what you're saying, by the way. And I have to keep bringing you back to the fact that, so for example, when I say identity, I really mean a digital identity, and I'm going to define it in a very technical fashion. I don't want to get into a bunch of philosophy. Okay.
This procedural thing, I'm worried that we've used a half an hour. We haven't gotten to the first mention of a Microsoft system, and we have the ability to interject about every 15 seconds from here on out. I was wondering if it's possible to consider a procedure, maybe you get 10 minutes where we don't interrupt and you get through all your slides in 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I'll try.
And we can read the slides, and then we can have a basis for figuring out what seems to be key to the group, because otherwise I'm just afraid we don't really.
Okay, I'll go there. Claims. I want to define claims, cryptographically verifiable information about one digital actor that are made by another. Claims transformation. At organizational and technical boundaries, one set of claims can be transformed into another. Relying party specifies claims required and which candidate claim providers it wants to employ. So this comes back to your comment. And claims are delivered in security tokens, for example, SAML, generated by security token servers. So those are in terms of how we now implement what we've been talking about in the previous slides. This is it's through claims transformation, and security token servers. So claims in the WS architecture, the client wants to do an operation X at the resource, and we don't want hardwired, as I explained. So therefore, the resource needs to be able to publish its policy. So the policy indicates the required claims, the candidate providers, and that sort of stuff. And so this is, we are implementing all of this based on protocols that we have developed across the industry called the WS Star Stack. So once you know the policy, then you can go to the authorization provider. Now, the authorizations can themselves, and this is very, very important, the authorizations can be in the form of claims. In other words, some authorizing entity makes claims about what the subject can access. Now, in order to go to the authorization entity, which is on the relying party end, right? It's the relying party that has the authorization policy. It's necessary to have some claim that you take to the authorization, to the relying party, and so you go to what we model as an identity provider. And that's these different identity providers I was talking about. Those providers have policies that are available through metadata exchange so that the system can determine which provider, what capabilities different providers have. And so to get your first token, you basically present a credential. So I have some kind of a credential, maybe a key, maybe a something off a token, or various types of credentials that I use to unlock my initial claim. Once I have the initial claim, I can go to the authorization provider, get it changed into an authorization claim, and then take that to the resource and gain access. So you can see that the claims pass through the client. So the client can, the claims sent from the identity provider to the authorization provider pass through the client, so you are able to accomplish the law of control, for example. The identity provider returns a security token, which has claims A and B. That goes to the authorization provider, so it can massage it into claims 1 and 2, and those go back to the resource. So that we've incorporated, for those who are interested, we've incorporated all these things like, from SUDSI and so on, as well as from the traditional, more traditional Kerberos and PKI approaches, because there is a relying party translation there. So then our product offering consists of these. A resource, which is the relying party, and Indigo, which is our framework for implementing distributed systems. We'll have all of these capabilities built in, and we can drill down into that later, if you wish. And then an Active Directory. Active Directory will be broadened to have all of these new pieces that integrate with it. New pieces in the sense of being a complete identity suite. And so one of the key pieces will be this STS, which is an authorization provider. So that will be something, so you'll be able to delegate authorization decisions to this authorization STS, and thereby create a world in which I can actually determine who, first of all, put in my policies, secondly, determine compliance to the policies. Now, your authorization provider might live on your resource. So even though we're showing it on a different box, that's just to show how the architecture can be decomposed, centralized, decentralized, whatever you want. Meanwhile, Active Directory will also have an identity provider STS. So Active Directory is already the major authentication mechanism used by Fortune 500 companies. And so we'll be adding that piece to it. And on the client, there'll be a new mechanism called the info card. So the info card is this protected subsystem that I spoke about, which allows the user to, which is where the negotiation occurs between a credential desired by the resource and a credential of, a claim or security token desired by the resource and a security token which can be offered up by one of the identity providers which knows the user. And this info card system on the client also has the properties that we talked about in terms of being a protected subsystem and having the clarity in terms of communication with the user. So the info card is a simple abstraction for managing claims. It's grounded in the real-world metaphor of physical cards. It supports both self-issued and managed cards, and it's implemented as a secure subsystem. I'm going to give you a little demo. Is a demo okay in the procedure? Well, I wanted to ground it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I wanted to ground it in the reasons we did it. Okay. You want to be Jim? You don't know. You don't know what that format has to go through. Okay. So here we are. This demo shows authenticating to MSN as a resource. But it doesn't have to be, that's kind of unfortunate. It could be Amazon as a resource. It could be anything else, okay? So it kind of looks like it's, our branding, and that's not the intention. I'll show you that in a second. So basically I showed you that, there is a sort of a default identity that has been designed, that has been associated with this resource. When I brought up the program to go to the resource, it automatically knew what the default identity was, and it got that out of the protected subsystem, and it was a very simple matter for me to sign into it because I'm reusing an established digital relationship. So now let's say I want to use a different identity on this. Well, then I can go in and sign in with a different account. And here you see a rendering. This is very ugly at this point, but it will get beautiful, as all things do, of the you're on a special protected desktop. It can't be screen scraped. It's running under special processes, etc. It has a visual secret with it. You've put in, the concept is you've done something to the interface in order to put in some secrets. Therefore, a farming system cannot imitate this interface. Now in here, I've got some other identities that have already been set up with that and used with that provider. So I just can switch over to one of those, and now I'm in on that identity. And now let's say I want to go and set up yet another new identity. And this is what's very interesting. Let me explain this. The sign into MSN, you can only see this. You only see this particular approach screen if you've already got an established identity relationship. And it's verifying the key. It's cryptographically ensuring that you're not being farmed. It's not simply based on TCP/IP and all that sort of stuff. Now, let's say I want to use another card.
Are those secrets images? I can't.
The secrets can be images, multimedia, anything else. In the first version, they're visual.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
You might want to point out that the MSN shown there appears to be like a co-branding. It could be Amazon instead.
Yeah. If you were going to the Amazon site, you would be seeing the Amazon logo. And so we're working with VeriSign and everything so that we're actually getting signed logos. The public identities, if you go back to Law 4, are based on certificates largely in the first release, but we'll be adding other means of establishing reputation. And we're taking them much further in the sense that the visual cues will be there for the user to understand whether he or she is going to the right place. So let's say I want to add now a new digital relationship. Okay. Well, and so this would be what happened, you know, here as Arun says, if I came in and I was going to Amazon, I would see the Amazon logo here. That means that VeriSign and eTrust have certificates for that site that that include presentation of that logo. So this is a protected thing. It's not something that can be hacked into. And I say, okay, well, here I've got one more identity here. I'm going to pick it. I get the Halo Leader card, which is just something I made myself. It wasn't issued. It's not like the one that was issued by Microsoft that you saw previously. Here are the attributes being asked for by the site so that you get control, you get minimal disclosure, and we can talk about, we have several mechanisms for ensuring that. And I go through the registration. And that's as hard as it is for me to get yet a new digital identity for use with this site. So,
in order for that to happen, the site has got to have decided to use this system too, right?
Yep.
I don't understand the visual.
Okay.
Could you explain what? I just don't. I don't know. I don't get it at all. So, what problem is it trying to solve? And how is it doing that? And I don't mean tell me at the cryptographic level. I don't even have the big picture.
Okay. Let's say I go to. Let's say I have a piece of. Let's say I want to put a piece of spyware on your machine,
Okay.
and I might do that, say, using the internet, right? You know, you within a web browser.
Great. Okay.
And I go, and we can't really limit what a program can do on the screen in the sense of it can paint whatever picture it wants.
Right.
And so if they're smart enough, they can say, oh, I know what the InfoCard system looks like. I'll paint a picture of the InfoCard system.
Right.
And it's really my Trojan horse running on your machine.
Right.
So what we ask you to do
Me as the user.
as a user, yeah, and it sort of happens automatically when you first start up, is it gets customized for you.
Okay.
In that example, which is just an example, Jim Alchin, who is a fanatic guitar player, dragged in a picture of a 1956 Stratocaster, which is what he likes. That's his picture. So, you know, when I was going to, let's say it was yours, right? When I was going to take over your system, I wouldn't know that you'd put a Stratocaster in there. You could have put anything in there. You could have put your baby in there, or your girlfriend or something. So.
Yeah, but where is that picture stored?
Now the picture is stored in a protected storage system, which is, you know, very much better protected than things.
Password? No, right.
It is protected with however you configure the system. So it might even be stored on a separate device. It might be stored on a dongle. It might be stored on a phone. All of these things are performed by web services. So all of the components are remotable.
But it's stored in such a way that this Trojan horse
Can't get to it.
For some reason can't get to it, although your thing can get to it.
Yes, correct.
But a password would have had the same. I could have just stored a text password.
That only you knew.
That only I knew and was stored there, and it got to.
Yes, and that we also have a piece of text in that demo.
I like the visual image.
I asked the question to make sure I understood it, not because I'm arguing that.
But you can guess a password, right? How do you guess an image, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Just want to make sure there was nothing else sacred about the image. It doesn't have to do really with screen scraping.
yes, because it's important that my Trojan can't scrape it off the screen when it's coming up legitimately.
Right.
Otherwise, the Trojans are managed.
So how do you
Yeah.
do that?
So it has to be on a separate desktop that can't be accessed by any programs except this program.
So that, I don't want to take you too far,
Okay.
but that does imply that nobody else can. You talked about system of systems, or at least DARPA would call it a systems of systems. You would call it meta system. And somebody can't build, a third party can't build certain pieces to play with your system. They could be websites, but they can't build the plugin that replaces this MSN. That nice gray screen with the pictures of identities, because if you made those interfaces available publicly, that is, you told people, then they'd be able to pull the same screen scraper tricks, but at one level lower.
Right. So they can be each end. They can be the identity provider, or they can actually be three things. They can be a reputation provider, an identity and claims provider, and a relying party / authorization provider. But they can't be the InfoCard system itself. On the other hand, our plan is, and this is under non-disclosure, of course, we're working with other manufacturers like Apple and, Firefox and Social Physics, if you know the people in the Eclipse project, open source and all this, in order that we could potentially have a similar paradigm across platforms. And we will not be treating this as something where we want to ring. This will be something that we will be making available to everybody who wants to do similar systems. So you can imagine on a Linux system you would need, if this actually goes forward, they will want to put something similar on that system.
So do you know about this system called Corso?
Corso, no. I'd like to find out about it.
Well, it seems very familiar to you.
These are actually 10 minutes after one.
Yeah.
I don't. What are there Are there a lot more slides?
No, there aren't a lot more, but let's see. If you want to know what our overall platform looks like, there's the integration system, the directory system, and the access system where you have we actually now call it claims-based access control and all this stuff. So, yeah, we can call this, I can see you I don't know, it's up to you. There are some more things where I can go through what we're building.
About this visual secret again, and that is the link between that secret and the info card. That's also
It's not one secret per info card. It's one secret for the protected subsystem, or one set of secrets. And then what happens is, your info cards are really just mechanisms for visualizing. We say reifying.
okay.
And they're mechanisms for reifying your digital relationships. And then when you select one, it will go out and connect with the identity provider associated with that relationship, which might be local, but I'm just positing it as being something that can live anywhere. It could live on your phone, it could live in the sky, it could live locally, it could live in the glass house in your company.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is when you're first registering and you provide this picture,
You don't provide it to the site. The system provides it to the user, so the user knows she is in a safe computing environment.
that picture.
And if you're already compromised, if your machine's already been compromised at the moment you stick your your guitar there,
You're toast. So this is an ongoing fight, okay, to continuously, and I don't want to say that this is completely foolproof, right? If you're compromised before you start, you're screwed. And over time, we're integrating this and making it stronger and stronger and stronger as it goes down into the hardware.
might be a good suggestion that you just go through your slides at least quickly so we see what you have. And
see, I got more than my 20 minutes. Okay, I'm too slow. I get the impression I'm really slow.
That's too fast.
That's, you know, we're fast enough that.
So, are you interested in what we're doing with the domain controllers? This is sort of stuff where we allow you to run Active Directory at lowest privilege modes. So, for example, if you have branch offices, they run under different keys than your glass house. So we're able to improve a lot of the security. So what you see here is really a lot of work to harden the security infrastructure of Active Directory. Yeah, so we're also introducing a Unix compatibility schema because we have a bunch of vendors like Vintella and Centrify that allow you to integrate Linux and Unix systems into the identity system managed by Active Directory. We're coming out with a read-only DC, so once again, that reduced physical security requirements. Somebody can't, a rogue administrator who has a read-only copy can't alter policies for you. We have our product Atom, which is the Active Directory application mode. So that's a version of the directory that is just like a typical LDAP directory, and that's included in the OS distribution. Access services. Today we have PKI, Authorization Manager. In R2, we introduce Active Directory Federation services, so that's Federated Web SSO, interop-tested WS Federation, passive requester profile. So there's a whole bunch of different vendors who support that. Integrated with Windows SSO. It uses the claims-based access model using SAML assertions. And I guess this hasn't been announced at all, is that SharePoint will be integrated with that, so you'll be able to have federated SharePoint. And then in Longhorn, you'll have the next version of ADFS, version 1.1, which will contain more interoperability profiles. You'll have ADSTS, which is the STS that I was talking about in these slides, for authorization and for identity provision. And you'll have the InfoCard system. In terms of integration services, well, I think Microsoft Identity Integration Server is pretty well known. We have, for example, a whole an alliance that's been formed to develop new products for MIIS. So it's actually becoming a platform. It's been taken as a platform by people in the industry. That's the first time that a meta-directory provisioning system has been adopted as a platform widely. In the R2 wave, we'll be releasing a bunch of new connectors for RACF, ACF2, Top Secret, SAP, PeopleSoft, and we'll be introducing a self-service password reset that includes voice capabilities and telephony capabilities. So it will be quite a splash in the industry. The Longhorn wave, we'll be releasing MIIS, we call it Gemini. So this is advanced workflow. So you set up your workflow using visual paradigms, and you can build little workflow objects that you can add to the palette, so that now you can set up policies. Instead of saying, well, gee, how do you get an access right? Typically, you get those through policies, in other words, and processes. So you may have to, put in a request. It has to be approved by somebody, blah, 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 blah. So it's necessary to be able to model these processes and then have that automatically translate into auto-generation of the appropriate policy. So now you can prove that the process was followed to lead to the policy, and then you can audit using the policy. So the advanced auditing and reporting is to be able to answer the question, who are all the people who can do Operation X? Or What operations can person X do? The integration system will move towards declarative policy rather than requiring you to code things. It will support computed memberships, so you can build roles and groups and things like that, such as everybody in Building 40 or everybody who reports to Jim Alchin or whatever. And there will be a self-service platform and applications. For example, auto group. In other words, we're moving more and more towards delegating authorization policy to whoever it's appropriate to delegate it to, whether it be business analysts or end users. Et voila. Is that okay? Fast enough?
You know, I'm one of the law guys, and I may be missing something very fundamental here. But I was wondering what the underlying physical device is going to be here. I mean, passwords are the thing that you're correctly condemning. But what's ultimately going to get someone to know that I'm me? And then, of course, there's a question, once identified, how do you make sure it doesn't leak out and such. But what are you contemplating? It sounds like you are thinking of having the architecture support a whole bunch of them. But what do you think is the preferred mode?
There is no preferred mode because it depends.
What do you find to be? If you were to envision 5 years from now, if this is implemented, how will people be actually identified?
Okay, you know, we're a platform vendor, and we have to provide a platform. I personally, I think it's the phone.
The phone.
The phone with the fingerprint on it, and you can unlock. You know, that becomes quite secure.
And I'm sorry. So it's fingerprint identification
So the combination of possessing a fingerprint, possessing a phone, a fingerprint sensor in the phone that is itself tied with a secure key to the, in other words, is trusted by the device which holds your your stronger credentials, your other credentials, like public keys.
What happens if the government's fingerprint database gets leaked?
I mean, let's be clear, that fingerprint that Ken is talking about, the fingerprint is not something, the fingerprint is what unlocks your credentials on the phone. It's not something that you reveal and disclose to them.
They would have to steal your phone too.
Got it.
And then they would have to, and then when you stole your phone, you wouldn't have been able to phone up and say somebody stole my phone, because any of those things would you have to have all those things.
Got it. So it's a combination of the physical device that I carry on my person with a mechanism that makes it hard for someone to once they take the device to quickly change it.
But there can be higher. There's retina. There's all kinds of things depending on how valuable your information is, and so you have to match. We need to up the overall level, but we also need to match the technology to the threat, and that's why you need a platform. What we're seeing that is very interesting is that, have you guys seen the Exalto card, for example? Okay, I really recommend you look at that because it'll blow your mind. It is a smart card that has the entire web. What?
Not in the Bluetooth bomb sense.
No.
That's good.
But it has. I know that. I was really shocked when I saw that whole type of problem. But anyway, the Exalto thing has the whole web stack on the smart card. So you can actually do TCP/IP and SOAP into the card, and all that means is that the card itself, the cloud is going everywhere, including onto the card. The cloud being the cloud, of devices.
So, in one of your slides, the one that had all the pyramids for Active Directory, it seemed as if you were providing some modules that basically manage authorization, and they're doing it by looking at some set of evidence or credentials and making a decision. That suggests that the sorts of policies people could write depend on what information is available to this engine, if you will. And you're writing the engine, so how expressive is that policy language if you control it, and if you don't control it, who does control it?
Well, those are very good questions as well. Okay. First of all, I don't know the answer to that. We're looking, you know, the world has a number of policy languages. People are fighting really, you know, there are really mean fights going on over these policy languages. It's all mixed up with draconian IP.
I was going to say, if you're worried about DRM, for example, you might want to know how many times the video was played, which means you might need access to some state information where that records how many times it's been played. Well, if you don't have any way to get the stuff into your engine in a secure way, then you're preempting the opportunity to write those kinds of policies.
I was assuming
we are
using WS Start is using XRML at least.
It's
You can do that.
well, okay. Our plan. Okay, I'll tell you what we're doing currently. Okay, and all I'm saying is that this is subject to evolution as we work with other people because it has to be broader than Microsoft. So, you know, our current plan is that for identity assertions claims we use SAML. Because it's called, you know, security assertion markup language. Then for authorization modeling, we use XRML2. Okay, and that is very expressive in terms of all those issues like, you know, how many times a video has been played and so on. So you can build in all of those things. But there are other candidates out there. And a lot of people have an erroneous assumption that the IP problems, that there are IP problems around XRML that do not exist around other systems, and that isn't true. I mean, in fact, it's the underlying mechanisms that are patented as opposed, or in which there are patent claims, as opposed to the language itself.
So XRML2 is technically that is ambiguous, and there are a bunch of wrinkles is being polite that people have exposed about.
Correct,
but
and those are being addressed.
You'll just deal with that.
That will always be the case with new technology, so that doesn't bother me too much. I mean, it bothers me.
Can I ask a slightly different question? In fact, you presented the main architecture that you presented looks kind of fairly standards-based, and it looks very like Liberty with some extra XML, extra web services stuff thrown in. So the technology itself doesn't look so radical. I mean, you've got this whizzy front end thing with pictures on your cards. Yeah, I guess that's a bit of whizzy technology that's yours. But most of it looks like bog standard, state-of-the-art technology. So why is all this? Why do you keep saying this is terribly sensitive and presented by
In the NDA, where's the NDA parser?
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess is it just the fact that this is Microsoft's product strategy that's secret? It's certainly not the technology that's secret, surely.
The fact that we are building authorization STSs, first of all, you know, currently the industry doesn't have an architecture that properly unifies authorization and authentication, so there is a lot of new intellectual property here.
So it doesn't work so
That's wrong. I mean, we don't currently. We have different technologies.
Okay. I did say that.
No, okay. Let's leave the info card. I agree with you about the info card. Okay, but there's also around.
I mean, the idea of actually putting pictures up and getting people to realise that that's a special bit of software. I'm not sure that that's new, but okay. I don't want to argue about that.
It's the combination, of course. It's the way that things are used together that creates a.
That was the rest of it.
That was discussed for NATSCAB already, at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think what's you know certainly practically, maybe I would like to learn. Like I'm here to learn, right, and to set up relationships so that you guys can set me right. I mean, I look at Microsoft right now, and we have like 24 different technologies for doing all of these things. We have PKI, which doesn't relate to Kerberos, which doesn't relate to rights management, which doesn't relate to anything. In this new model, and we don't, and nobody has the mechanisms whereby you can actually audit in the sense of saying, answering the question, who can do what with all of my resources, and vice versa. You know, transitive, reversible queries. Nobody has that. This system will allow those things to be produced. So I think there are things that are original there, but you know, if I'm wrong, then I want to be corrected. Sorry.
Well, okay. I mean, there's several systems around. I think the interesting thing about your W-star architecture is it deals with protocols based on SOAP and HTTP and so on and so forth. I think that is the interesting part.
And it's composable.
Yeah. Whereas previous systems, I mean, 1992, 1993, HP produced a Presidium authorization system product.
Yes.
Which is very
DASCOM had a good one too.
And then came DASCOM, then the policy director of IBM. So there are a lot of languages, a lot of...
yeah, but they were not integrated. It wasn't the same mechanism for authorization and...
They were based on OSMPC and OMG, Corba, IAOP protocols. So protocols were different. But the question which is interesting to me, let me come back to the question because I think I'll agree with Chris in terms of the architecture. But the thing which I still don't understand is the front-end part, you know, your info card part. I don't quite clearly see how you prevent this screen scraping. I'm not getting that right. You know, this initially, because the rest of it is to me, you know, more or less standard, and the difficulties are in policy composition, policy management. Do I have joint action delegation? You know, composition of policies. I mean, on the policy languages issues. You mentioned XRML. There's the XSEML, XAML. You know, a lot of other languages which okay. But my question still, I'm trying to get to the novelty part of your stuff, which I believe is in the front end part of it, info card part, and with multiple identities, and how the Trojan horse it doesn't work. I don't understand that.
Okay, first of all, if a Trojan horse comes in with root, you know, basically root privilege, like administrative access, we can't prevent anything in the versions that we're shipping in Longhorn. But what we are doing in Longhorn is making sure that the user, it isn't necessary to run as root in order to do the things that users do. And so therefore we can have, and so we can say the user won't pick up that type of Trojan, which could become capable enough to break into that stuff, all right, in a normal, if he's operating in the normal environment of Longhorn, all right? In other words, when you want to go to administrative action in the new version of Longhorn, you actually have to do something that elevates you temporarily. You do it and then you fall back down. So there's no way for a Trojan operating under your identity to be able to elevate itself up to get into the info card system. Now, I'm not claiming that this is perfect or totally novel.
So you're relying
but it is,
on Longhorn to provide that.
Huh?
You're relying on Longhorn's.
Well, in Longhorn, you get that level of protection. If the thing will be shipping on WAP, which is the, what is WAP?
Windows API pack.
Windows API pack. So it will go down level to, I just know it as WAP. But it will go down level to XP and that sort of stuff. So, but in XP, you won't have the same level of protection because we haven't separated administrative access from user access successfully.
Virgil, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I have two questions. One is about the secret that you display on the card. I understand that I can register the secret securely, my secret, but how do you protect it when it's basically put on my screen?
The desktop is a secure desktop in the sense that you have to be running as this privileged process we were just talking about in order to get onto that desktop.
But if I have a Trojan on my system,
if the Trojan on your, if you were running as administrator rather than as a user, then if you got a Trojan on your system, it could, and if that Trojan was smart enough, it could get into the store and figure that out. Yeah.
So
but you will, in Longhorn, you will not be running as administrator.
Well, let's pretend we're not running Longhorn, right? In that case, we can get that image secret.
If you're not running Longhorn, then if you've got the right virus, your secret can be stolen from you.
But I think that's not an unfair state of affairs. I mean, they have two choices. They could either not run on old systems or run on old systems. If it runs on old systems, then it's only going to be as trustworthy as the old systems are. And if it doesn't run on old systems, then the chances of it being embraced by the customer base are much reduced.
So this is sort of a secondary question too, but I want to follow on your answer. But one of the nasty habits of Trojans is they run as me, regardless if I'm administrator or not administrator. In which case, there is absolutely nothing I can do about protecting the secret at that point.
No, because the system does not run as you. The InfoCard system does not run as you.
The InfoCard system run as what? As administrator?
Yeah, basically as itself, which only the administrator can alter.
No, but I'm not talking about altering. I'm talking about accessing the screen area with the secret.
You cannot access that screen area. A program running in your context could not access that screen area.
So if I want to change my secret, how do I do it?
You can, and you can bring up. You can cause the new desktop to arise. Okay, but you can't run code that scrapes that desktop. So there's an API that lets me say, materialize this new desktop so that I can manage my secret. But there's no API that lets you get to that desktop.
It's an isolated protected subsystem.
It's an isolated protected subsystem.
Okay,
But you know, I'm not trying to oversell it. I'm trying to explain where the limitations are, what our strategy is to continuously upgrade it. It's a very big step forward for us. I don't know, did we finish or?
Well, just last thing. I'm sort of skeptical of being able to protect these secrets on hardware without any hardware support.
Right, and so, you know, that's why okay, so now let me go to the problem. I said it was factored so that the different things can live in different places. So, for example, you could say, the identity provider for the InfoCard lives on my phone. I can only get to it through the PC, but then it connects to my phone via Bluetooth. Okay, so you can build that. Now what happens? It means that somebody has to attack and take control of both your PC and your phone simultaneously. All right, and especially if you get to use a then when you actually incorporate fingerprint on the phone, where the fingerprint device is itself a secure device, in other words, right into the fingerprint chip is a key. Now they have to take over the fingerprint, your fingerprint, the phone, and your computer simultaneously. And so you build. This is where not all of your stuff has to be on one machine.
Okay, maybe we can reserve this for some other time, but I had a second question. My second question was about your ability to figure out what are all your resources in the system based on this new resource and user identification. And you suggested that that's a particularly novel thing. In other words, if I ask...
It's not novel as a desire. It's novel to the extent you can deliver it, yeah. But I mean, I do agree that people like DASCOM and so on within their realms were able to answer some of those questions, not as properly as they wanted to.
So if I can ask the question, what are Kim Cameron's accesses in the system now? And I can get an answer, a complete answer.
If all of your resources pass through STSs, then you can go to the system of STSs and answer that question.
So, what is it now?
Well, then it's considered as something that belongs to a different domain. So, like if you're running a domain, then you want to say, in my domain of, that I'm running of information, everything goes through this set of STSs, and then you'll be able to answer the question for the resources that you control.
Only for the resources that you control, meaning that Kim Cameron controls.
No, that the domain controls. We don't want to have the assumption of one single domain.
No, but it's multiple domains with multiple STSs and the resources controlled by the multiple STSs in the multiple domains.
The audit capability has to be in the reference monitor, and this system embraces your ability to put that in, but it doesn't force it on you. And it would seem it would need that flexibility.
Well, certainly, but this question is larger. For example, I have my domain, which is not yours, different administration, and somebody places your credential on an access control list here. Can you figure out that you actually have access to that resource, you yourself? Or some
that's possible. It's possible that I myself can figure out I have access to that resource. Yes.
Running Google or running what? I mean,
no, because I know where I've registered.
Oh.
So inside the InfoCard system, I know where I've registered.
Somebody can actually place your credential on an access control list without you being registered.
Well, then I have no way of knowing that, and it doesn't matter because if I have, you know.
So basically, somebody bought you a hotel room in another city. If you go there, you can go to the room, but you have no idea what hotel it is, what city it is, or what the room number is, and you would like to divinely find out what that is.
Well,
and you don't know that they did it.
Yeah. Well, wait a second. One of the questions that we cannot ask. I started out with your claim about this new technology. One of the things that we cannot really do nowadays is to find out what the old accesses are. I mean, per subject review, it's an extremely difficult.
You can find out about all the accesses that you've had, you know, that you've
exercised.
Yes, right.
Or been granted by a domain with which you have a relationship. If that domain wants to tell you, that's another issue. Does it want to tell you?
I think the privacy people might argue that your notion of review being imposed in the system is stronger than they want to live with. They would prefer to have the flexibility that less stuff be available to you unless you needed it. So, I mean,
simply addressing the mechanism part of it rather than the policy part of it, which you are referring to. And this notion that this is new and novel thing.
Well, I don't want to, please, you know, I don't know what I said I really apologize. It's new and novel for us, okay? I'm not arguing that this is groundbreaking.
I'm not disputing it.
Right.
So I'm actually answering, in some sense, Chris's question as to whether it's new or novel. It may very well be.
I'm not the best person to know because you guys are better positioned to know what's new and novel than I am.
We're not publishing a paper, so it doesn't have to do with it.
That's the problem. I'm trying to make something that improves the lives of the users.
New service from Microsoft for your slide.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, and it solves a lot of the problems that we have created for people.
Could you say something about how Kerberos fits into this?
Yes, well.
What is Kerberos then?
Kerberos is it's a set of claims. Kerberos is a claim by the KDC, and in our case, there's even we have the PAC, right?
But come down a level. So
okay.
I'm going to use Kerberos. I sit down at my machine, this nice visual secret business comes up, and I want to become Fred Kerberos Fred, which is my identity with Kerberos, and that's one of my options as an identity, and I say yes, and that goes out to the Kerberos provider.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not.
It goes out to the ADFS. So what happens is, we have, AD has a number of heads on it. One of them is Kerberos.
So
And
Well, translation happens out at the AD. It's not.
it happens at an STS, because what will happen is I will go to the to an AD STS. I will present, and remember it exchanged one set of claims for another. I will present a Kerberos ticket, which is a set of claims in Kerberos format, and it will give me back a SAML ticket, say, if that's what the resource requires.
But that Kerberos ticket was something that I was storing locally on my machine in my
Cache,
card.
in your Kerberos.
And the way
ticket
I
cache.
got that was by going
through Kerberos, because
from my machine.
Yeah.
So so Kerberos isn't integrated so I have to make a separate.
It is integrated at the point of I take my Kerberos ticket, I pass it through the STS, and get back the SAML ticket.
But why? So now
So that turns out to be very, very useful.
I could see that.
Yeah.
But it might be more useful if the user, the person at the machine, doesn't have to go to a separate place, namely a Kerberos server, to get a Kerberos ticket. At least doesn't make an overt thing. From what I think you told me, if I wanted to get a Kerberos ticket, a separate window, whatever my Kerberos local thing, would pop up, and I would have that interaction.
No, the theory is you already have your Kerberos ticket sitting there. Now, if you're outside the firewall or something, you might not use. You probably won't use Kerberos. You'll probably use, a different form of authentication.
The way when I use
maybe Arun wants to try.
When I use Kerberos, I type in some passphrase, and there's some dialogue between my machine and the KDC, and I get back a Kerberos ticket. Okay. Well, that typing in my passphrase and that dialogue, was I talking to this Microsoft software that I just saw, or was I talking to the local Kerberos agent that I currently run?
Well, there's a Kerberos client-side agent that you currently run, but you're talking to some KDC at the other end.
So let's talk about the client-side agent.
Right.
That has a completely different look and feel from what you're providing, right?
Well, there is. So today.
No, in your future.
Right, but I mean, the future builds upon what we have today.
Yeah.
Today, the only interaction that you have with the Kerberos via your local Kerberos agent is the act of logging into your Windows machine. When you log into your Windows machine, that's your interaction. That that username password that you see, that's your only interaction with Kerberos. There's nothing else beyond that.
I see.
So the act of logging into your Windows machine has unlocked. That means when you're sitting inside a Kerberos realm, basically the act of logging in and interacting with the KDC the first time is what unlocks this entire infrastructure system for you anyway.
So currently the Kerberos passphrase is something that Windows shields from the user you generated for the user?
The way you sign on to Windows in our initial version 1, you will know that passphrase. That's the way you actually gain access to your Windows device to begin with.
So what you're saying is you're identifying the password I need to get to my Windows device with the Kerberos passphrase.
In a domain case.
In a domain case.
But you've put your finger on a very important thing, and that is that, yes, in the future, but this is not version 1, we want the info card system to be what logs you into Windows. But we're talking futures here. In other words...
So I'm not fussy about which version it gets deployed in. I just want to make sure that the revision is right.
You're completely right.
Is that as far down as it would go, or are you imagining it would log me into things further and further down in the stack?
Like what?
I'm not the computer.
To a Windows person, there's nothing further down.
Yeah, no.
Windows is following first.
So
can we quote you on that, or is that covered by the?
I think that's probably underestimated.
Let me answer that question in the future. So now we're talking beyond version 1. Ideally, what we would like to see is this metaphor of the info cards, which represents your digital identities that you saw in the user experience. Those to be able to cover to be able to wrap even your Kerberos credentials or your Kerberos passphrase as well. So there would be one representation of you. There would be, you would see that info card, which basically is a Kerberos identity. In other words, when you do need to interact with the KDC and obtain a corresponding Kerberos token, you'd get exactly the same experience as you would in employing another info card that needs to go to a provider that gives you a SAML token, maybe based on a different credential, right? So it'd be the same experience, not a different window, not a completely schizophrenic experience, but rather the same unified experience. That's what we would like to see.
So, Arun, is it possible that you could log in locally outside of the domain and then be requested to do a Kerberos login after the fact?
Yes.
So are the other authorization tokens or identity tokens, are they generated from this Kerberos, or are they separately assigned, or is there any?
Separately assigned.
So let me be very specific, okay, instead of being in general. That might make it more clear.
Yeah.
Firstly, it's completely orchestrated by what the relying party requires and the corresponding matching up identity provider is capable of providing. The client is only the conduit. It's basically serving this matchmaking capability and this unambiguous communication with the user through this unified interface.
So the thing that the Kerberos password is designed to do, along with this visual thing, is just to let me know that I'm interacting with my system.
That's right.
This is my card. It has no relation to the identity tokens or authentication tokens otherwise. Is that right?
Correct. It doesn't control that.
Yeah, it's not related.
So let me give a specific example. I'm a Microsoft employee. And when I log on my machine, when I'm sitting inside Microsoft, I employ Kerberos. I get a Kerberos ticket. Now, I want to employ my Microsoft identity to go and access my 401k plan, which is offered by Fidelity. Okay. Now, all Fidelity needs is the fact that I'm a Microsoft employee and I have been authenticated by Microsoft. And if you can get that assertion that I'm a Microsoft employee named Arun in a security token that it can verify, it's happy. It doesn't care if I employ Kerberos or not. Okay. So its policy, as far as it says, if you want to access your 401k program, you need to come back with a token that says you are blah, as stated by Microsoft, and I'm happy. And I can verify that because I trust Microsoft. So that's all it says. Now in the info card system, we can match that up and say that the user happens to have a card that represents his Microsoft identity, which means that Microsoft is running a security token service that is capable of issuing that particular token. Now, in order to access that service might say, if you're sitting in Microsoft, the only way I'm going to be able to release you that token is if you give me a Kerberos ticket, because I believe that when you're sitting and working inside the domain, you should have a Kerberos ticket available to you. So that's the Microsoft SDS's requirement. And so now what the InfoCard system does is say, okay, in order to get that token, I need to take the Kerberos ticket, which hopefully in the version 1 I would have obtained as part of signing onto my machine. I can take that and proffer it out to the SDS and obtain the corresponding token. So in that sense, that whole interaction with Kerberos KDC never got manifested as an explicit experience for the user as part of going to the Microsoft SDS and getting that token for Fidelity. It's just employed.
So the problem that you're solving is not a how do we actually verify identity data. It's how do we create a secure environment in which I can know that my identities aren't being messed with. I mean, it's because this isn't a system that's going to issue them. It's just providing the infrastructure through which they can be exchanged and secure.
The InfoCard piece.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. Then there's the STS piece, which issues them.
And evaluates.
And the other STS piece that evaluates them. Correct.
So there.
Fred, some people had hands up.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm mesmerized. You guys, okay. Let's hear it.
I was there for a long time, but please don't take longer.
So I had a different angle I was interested in. There's personal data that gets associated with an info card. Is that
yes.
Okay. So I'd like to hear about if when I go to a website I have a relationship with, does all the personal data that's associated with that info card just get sent over to them, or how is there a controlled release? How does that all work?
Yes. the first time you go to that website and they ask for that, the first time they ever ask for data, it will appear to you what they're asking for. You'll see the data, and you'll have to approve the release, and then you'll see their reputation. So, you'll know that it's not a rogue site, and then you would have to either approve or not approve the release of the information.
Okay, so even though there's information associated with an info card, it doesn't just go.
It doesn't just go, and the whole card doesn't go. All that goes is what they ask for.
Right, and that I've explicitly authorized.
And that you've explicitly authorized. Now, in the future, if they ask for the information again, and your information hasn't changed, you will release that to them. And your system will. And the advantage of that is...
Well, people don't like that.
Well, the advantage there is that they then no longer need to store your PII. They can get your PII while you're interacting with them, but don't need to store it, and it can't be stolen from them. They can keep your profile, which is the fact that let's say it's a music site and you like Tom Jones, then they can keep that information. But now all you have is a piece of free-floating information that says person X likes Tom Jones, right? And that's very, very powerful. So that's why, but it'll never go, nothing will ever go to them, so without you releasing it. But it's considered that once you do release it, you've released it. And so it can go back to that party, and that gives that benefit.
And have you looked at what kinds of user interfaces there might be for communicating with the user about what kind of information they want and what they're going to do?
We've done extensive usability testing, and we're continuing to do it, and we'll do it till the cows come home. And to give you an example, in our first test, 95% or something of the users were able to be fished.
Well,
in our first test. In our final test, I think only 2% or something were able to be fished.
I wasn't so much. That's a whole other aspect.
Right, the social engineering aspect.
I was more worried about the case of how the user decides what information they want to provide, and you get a real informed consent. And especially in the case where there's some information that may be required for a transaction, and there are others that is optional, and the user needs to make a choice. But often in these sorts of interfaces, it's not presented in a way that it's obvious that you have a choice, and then you just sort of...
Okay, now I'll put forward our current thinking on that, because this is something I definitely would like you to think about and to talk to us about. And before I do that, I'll say that we've been to each end of this spectrum. And we finally ended up with this, and our goal was to achieve the minimum disclosure possible as per the laws. And we concluded that if you make things optional, everybody will always fish for everything. And so the only tool we have to prevent excessive disclosure is the fear of losing the customer by asking for so much. So we concluded that the best thing to do is to say, okay, you go to the site, it tells you what's mandatory, and you look at it, and if you accept it, you release it, and if you don't accept it, you don't go to the site. Otherwise, the site will always fish, and you always have this problem. But if you do this, then the site has to think twice, because you can always go to another site or not go to that site. And we think that there will be competition based on this. There's new research. Some of the new research that is very interesting is, about the way people relate to people's privacy habits and reputation and all of that, and what they're willing to divulge to whom and with whom they're willing to have relationships. So we're kind of, we think that this might work. But anyway, that is our current thinking.
Yeah, I want to just qualify that a little bit. It's also been our experience that, we are targeting an experience which can span a spectrum of age groups too. So it's generally true that most people are it's easy to train and teach people to be very category or taxonomy oriented, grouping oriented, as opposed to scan, individual line by line items and make a cognitive decision whether to release it or not. So it's easy to, for example, imagine that there are 3 cards on the experience that show up. One, like a safe card because it has very minimal set of information that gets released, and one is a very sensitive card. And it's easy to train my 10-year-old daughter to say, hey, it's okay to click on the safe card, but anytime this sensitive card shows up in your experience, because site is asking for it, don't, talk to your mom and dad. As opposed to have them kind of look at this, it's asking for social security number, and I should, click that off, and I should turn that on, and create all kinds of combinations. So that's another.
Well, and I didn't explain, and we should have explained, there are different kinds of cards. So, for example, the government card, certainly in anything that Microsoft put, the platform is extensible in the sense that third parties can create new cards and new identity services. But in anything that we would be involved with, you would never have your social security number except on your government card. And you would never have your credit card number except on your payment card. And so this is part of what Rune is talking about, is the sort of segregation of the information on cards that represent functions, so that you don't give your payment card when you're going out and doing something where you're just doing browsing. You're really conscious of what information is where. So that's another way to protect.
So, Lori, just a question back to you then. Is there a potential that this type of system could actually create a market driver for standardized information minimization?
Potentially. So related to that, it would be to standardize not only the information, but also the description of the primary and secondary uses of that information, which suggests tying P3P in there. And I'm not just saying it because I always say things about P3P. but
we want to tie P3P. We want to. There will be a policy presented to the user about information use. I should have said that too. Now the question is, and an area where we would like, more help is, the P3P is very complex, for the user to understand. It involves a lot of information. Are there ways? How could have people thought about the
P3P?
Sorry.
Users are never supposed to have to see P3P.
Right. So if we could have ways to help us visualize certain profiles of the system, and so we would like help and we'd like to work with people who are expert in this area to understand if we could have some sort of predefined categories of relationships that would make it easier for the user to understand what they're getting themselves into. So if you or anybody that you know would advise us on this, we'd be very grateful.
I'd be very happy to talk to you about that.
Well, that's very exciting.
Maybe I can just ask a question which is related to Lori's question, but I'm not sure it's the answer right. How can I be sure that the site that is now asking for this information, on my computer be sure, the site that is now asking my information and saying we're the ones to whom this information was given 3 months ago is in fact that same site?
Because it has a public key that you have remembered. We have this.
The computer has.
The computer has remembered, and furthermore, and this gets into some
public key. Then others know it, and
public key of the site.
Yeah. But a farming operation, I take it, if they can somehow get my computer to go over to their site, they can announce the same public key.
No, the way the public key works is a public key is something they share with us, but they also have this magic, private key.
Yeah, got it. So it's not just the idea of the public key; it would have to be encrypted.
Yes, everything is based on challenges. Everything in this system, I didn't go into it because it would be so tedious, but everything is cryptographically guaranteed.
In fact, the PII information that we release, the form of tokens, once the user is approved of the target service, it's encrypted to that server card. So even if somebody...
When you store that, the encrypted part, because how do you know where the change is? So for every site that I'm dealing with, you keep track of which of my attributes you left out and what date it was that they let them out. So if I change any one of those, you come back to me again. And
Yes, we do. That's one of the characteristics of the system.
So you're storing a fair amount of stuff.
We store it, and we cache it on the site.
I know.
It's very strongly encrypted. Sorry, Dave.
I have a probably naive, obvious question. I assume this is seen as a competitive advantage to Microsoft products going forward, and this will be one of many ID services. Another model would be looking into the future with phones playing as big a role as computers and stuff like that. It'll be important for this to be important to take hold. It'll be important to be widespread. So I assume it's the former.
No, it's the second.
It is. Okay. So and there's attempts. When would you start reaching out to other companies?
We have started, and we will be intensifying that every day and it will reach a feverish pitch by July. And we're very interested in speaking to everybody who's. You see, this is an area where, as I say, the rising tide raises all ships. The distributed computing can't go ahead without this. And Microsoft also has the most experience. I mean, we've done some terrible things, too. We intend to share with people, that some of the things we did were wrong. They were naive, but we have learned from it. We were there first, and we were able to learn some things, and we want to share that with other people.
So, and why won't this result in given the mistrust by some organizations of Microsoft, why won't get that same antibody reaction happen, you think?
It may. But nonetheless, the only way is, first of all, for us to be very open with the technology. First of all, to have the right approach to the technology, which is why the laws have been enunciated, to show that, and then people can actually compare what we're talking about with those principles. Secondly, to be very open, and we're working with open source people and people, from a number of different realms, and surprising people, I think, who can all agree that in this particular area we should all work together.
So it's success.
And we need people like yourselves to vet what we're doing and say, well, this is good. We think this will take us, further forward. And it's not a plot by Microsoft to control identity.
So
Microsoft gives up.
Success in 2 or 3 years would be all kinds of platforms, all using this mechanism.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly.
We're going to help seed the software on other platforms. We're also working, and it's not only, we also have a lot of interested people in the, the people running the websites.
Sure.
Look to us and say to us, Microsoft, assume your responsibilities and do something about this.
I understand why the websites you'd work with. And so does that mean you'd also reveal and help the Longhorn dependent pieces of it so that others could figure out what to do? Is that also what you're going to do?
I don't know what you mean by that, but yeah, everything in my project is royalty-free IP.
No, I think I'm not an expert in this, but it sounded earlier you were taking advantage of special things that Longhorn had to be able to make the system work.
Oh, well, other platforms can do that as well. In other words, they can establish different levels of privilege, right? And they can say the user doesn't operate under the top level of privilege, and that's all fine.
Okay.
But if you're coming down to, sorry, go ahead, Darren.
There's nothing that we are employing in the Longhorn that some other component running on Longhorn would not have the ability to employ. So there is, let's say, nothing proprietary that's exposed to the InfoCard system that is not exposed to somebody else.
But could a phone employ the same thing, or could Linux employ the same thing? And
I just want to dive in here real quick. We're supposed to take a break right now, but I think we've got some mojo rolling here. So what I'd like to do is let this go until 11 o'clock, then we'll call a break at 11, if that's cool. So just keep going.
Why'd you let Martine ask you a question?
No, but Dave's question was
I think I'm almost over, but it sounded like you said there's nothing that this will work without Longhorn, or there's no functions that any other system already has.
Yeah, but let's get it on the table. The way you're going to get this secure storage in Longhorn is probably by exploiting some hardware support in TPM that comes on PCs.
I don't think that'll be in Longhorn.
Ultimately, that's how you're going to get this.
Ultimately, that's how we'll do it.
And other platforms may or may not have that support. Sun, for example, is not talking about putting TPM in. Maybe they will have it too. So that's the level. That's
one good example.
That's the place that the real issue is.
It's a great example.
So if the goal is ubiquity, then there would need to be a part of, I would think, what you need to do to play. And that would be
we will be publishing guides. Basically, the way we look at this is sort of an application of WS protocols that we have built, but we will publish the implementer's guide for other parties to be able to play in the system, and we will talk with other people providing similar platforms about what we've done. And it won't be. In other words, here's how I look at it. I see it as a backplane for identity in which we are making the BIOS fully available.
Martine.
Thank you.
And then we can take a break.
I understand that a lot of what you said works very well in one scenario where the user is using maybe their own laptop, perhaps with a cell phone, and going to Amazon. And I have first a comment and a question. The comment is that until you have TPMs will not work as well with public terminals, if I understand you correctly. You cannot walk up to a terminal that you don't control with a smart card and trust that your secrets will be kept. And
unless it's remoting the interface to your phone.
It's a smart card. It's not the one with the display. Fine.
You mean that Bluetooth would be okay?
You can put something on top of. You can put encryption on top of Bluetooth that makes. Bluetooth is damaged, but you can put encryption on top of Bluetooth that will give you a safe channel.
Yeah. So the bigger question, though, is about.
No, but I think this is. I want you to always go back to. It doesn't have to live on the PC. It can live on the phone. So when I go to the.
But the GUI has to live on the phone as well, not just the secret. Fine. The other aspect of the system I don't understand is how you support programs using identities. It seems to me that sometimes you want to use different identities while running programs, instant messenger or whatever. And yesterday we heard about how the CLR aims in the future to support rich web applications that do interesting things for users. And within the CLR, I may have different app domains or whatever that are using different user identities. And I don't understand the interface between your system and the program world, and how programs on Longform will be able to use these identities to go across the network and do things for me using different identities.
Well, they will. That demo I showed. That's an example of a program accessing the identities. The demo I showed of Instant Messenger. So when it wanted me to select an identity, it called into the InfoCard system, and I was able to select an identity, and that was now available to the program.
Actually, what was missing from our slide deck was maybe an architectural slide that showed how the InfoCard system plugged into the Indigo model.
Yes, and it's very, very, very integrated. So basically, as an Indigo programmer, you don't have to be conscious of which particular identity. Very conscious, because you just call into the system, you get back an identity. All right, and that identity, and let's say you're going across the web, okay, or across the internet, excuse me, to another system. Then you would pass in the key of that other system, right, so that the InfoCard system knows what the program has told it to go and see. But when
Can you clarify between the login ID versus the InfoCard that's personally or currently being selected?
The login ID is one identity, and that may be one of your cards. For example, in a domain situation, but you would have other cards. You could bring your home identity to work and your work identity to home and all this sort of stuff. So you have a number of identities that you can choose from, and you could have your browser identity, some anonymous-like thing, and so on. But the main point is, when you write this application, you're going to say, well, here's the URL that I want to go to. Mm-hmm. And you pass that down into the info card system. The info card system will now contact that identity, that other system inside the protected subsystem, verify its reputation and so on, whether you have a digital relationship with it, whether it has a certificate, all that sort of stuff. Set up your relationship, and you decide what you release to that thing, and then you pop back out into the application. So, and in fact, the information that is presented to that other system is even encrypted under that system's key if the system wants it to. You have another type of thing, which is collaboration identities, okay? And I haven't really gone into those. That's where you actually want an omnidirectional identity. You want to be public, not private, right? Even as an individual. So that's maybe for doing things like email and so on. So that's also possible.
Okay, well, thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we take a break, 15 minutes.
Question is, what about my parents, how they get the first credential? So in some ways that's simply outside the system, and your system solves lots of problems, but not that first credential. But I'm trying to understand.
Well, that's not true. Okay, so Okay, so our view was this would not be successful if we didn't seed it for the consumer. So basically, your parents get a self-signed credential. In other words, they get an info card issued by themselves. And if you think of it, all the passwords you use on the web currently are credentials issued by yourself. And so it meets that bar. And then through use of, by leveraging your access to other identity systems, such, for example, as the credit card providers, now relying parties can get more confidence in your identity in a more objective sense. So
I don't understand I mean, just watching the press about choice point and identity fraud on individuals is a major issue. My mother's maiden name, my social security number, my credit card numbers are all subject to a lot of fraud. And that's enough to get me books at Amazon. It's enough to buy me a computer from Dell and do a lot of other things. And so if I buy a new PC a year and a half from now and it's got Longhorn out of the box, and all I do is I claim that I'm Kim so that I can then use Kim's credit card, then they start shipping things to my house, and it might even be a worse security problem because now it has this wonderful system that appears to have strong protections in place, but the first credential was false, and now the fraud is in some ways more effective even than it was before. And so, and this is a fear of strong identity cards generally, is that once people trust the system, it's a single point of failure for anybody who's an identity thief because they get in and they can use the whole thing.
Well, I think in all humility that there are a number of things being conflated in that argument. But basically, first of all, there's no way for third parties to get, one can't prevent a person from claiming to be someone and using PII that they already have to set up relationships. Now the question is, do the relying parties implicitly trust somebody who comes to them? And so let's go down into the real world here and talk about things like I've spent many hours with Amazon and eBay and Google and all these guys. Not Google, but that type of people. And so, when they get somebody coming to their site, they don't know who they are anyway. So what they do is they build, it's just like life in general. You build a relationship with someone over time. And at first, you're not going to extend them as much credit as you will after you've been through a number of credit experiences with them, and so on. So that you're not really, what you're doing is preventing the subject from being pilfered, from having their identity stolen from them, because they aren't using a password, and so, and they become used to this environment where you're authenticating the service that they're going to. Gee, right now, if you look at the password system, it's all designed to authenticate the person going to the website, not for authenticating the website. So what this system does is turn that all on its head. Now what will happen? There are problems with self-asserted identities. And so how do you solve those problems? Well, you hope they become self-evident. If they're really problems, they will become self-evident. If they become self-evident, then people will solve those problems by by setting up identity providers. And so we already are working with a number of people who want to establish identity providers that fit into this system. But the difference is, instead of being like Passport, where Microsoft is the identity provider, even though we don't have very good credentials for identity providing, right? We really want to be a profitable company for software, not for those other things, right? But now we can imagine an ecology in which different people can say, well, gee, I will be an identity provider. So we have people like Identity Commons. You have bottom-up people like Identity Commons and so on. Then you have people who are already in the identity business, like Visa. You have governments and so on. So what I think you will see is an ecology in which different claims providers people pointed out that I was not very clear in distinguishing between, when I say identity, I'm an identity person. I've been doing identity for 25 years, right? So to me, it's like a person who, if you see a hammer, if you have a hammer, you see everything as a nail or whatever. So in my view, everything is identity, but when I say identity, I'm talking about a set of claims. It's as simple as that. A set of claims that are vouched for by some party. And so we think that there will be this ecology in which people make claims, and that it becomes a way for people to make money, and it becomes a way for me as a consumer to get a value-added service, and it becomes a way, for enterprises to reconceptualize themselves.
Can I just point out, the hope that banks or somebody would provide that service has been around for at least 10 years. And the banks that
they had no way to deploy on the desktop.
But the banks that I talk to say they are scared to death of liability, because if they issue credentials that so-and-so is somebody and then they've been defrauded, they're the deep pocket is on the hook there. And it's been a very risky business to be in. The profit is not much. You can't charge so much to just give out an ID, but the liability is very high. But
what you have is a way to separate. So now the same system with a payment card, it could now be a secure payment card. And so now your parents, with a secure payment card, are, well, first of all, the credit card industry is protected by having a secure payment card capability, right? In other words, it's not just a number that I'm giving somebody a number, but I'm using a one-time
number. Yes. That's right. And that'll be facilitated by...
That will be facilitated by the system in such a way that somebody can't break in and steal the password. All right, so remember at the beginning I said, and this is like the really hard part for us in terms of developing a communication strategy for this, is you can't take any of these problems alone. You can only look at them as this really large set of problems that have to be solved over a period of time, things going all the way from the hardware through, getting all of these different identity providers and so on. Yeah.
So along the lines of sales problems, you have the sales problem that your system is only trustable to the extent that the stuff on which it runs can be trusted. That was articulated earlier, like the secure
That's a good way to
storage
put
and
it,
so on. And it's not your fault, but Microsoft's Windows version of this is going to be tarnished if the Linux version happens to be easily compromised.
Okay, that's a very interesting.
And authentication turns out to be a funny business. If anybody is willing to authenticate a person, if any platform or instance of a platform is willing to authenticate a person and is not trustable, then that person's identity credentials become useless throughout the internet. So you could build the best thing in the world, and Longhorn could be the best platform in the world, and I know false implies anything, but just as a hypothetical, and your strategy which says reach out to Linux and the other providers, which makes a lot of sense to me, can backfire in the worst possible way. But if you don't do it, it backfires in the other way.
In the other worst possible way.
So I see you as having a couple of possibilities. One is if Microsoft also provided services to take care of the storing the secret information, and you've talked about putting stuff out on the web. In addition to your STS authorization and authentication, you had other things out there, so that somebody could have a minimal implementation on another platform that trusts very little on the platform. Then you're less vulnerable to the weak implementation problem, and you're not going to be able to control if everything is open the way you want it to be. You're not going to be able to weed out the weak implementations.
Okay, that's a very interesting pushback. I need to go and meditate on that and talk to you some more.
I didn't say there was a way to win, but it's our job to show you all the ways you can lose.
No, and I need to thank you very much. I appreciate that.
But isn't engaging IBM the right way to do this? Because IBM.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about the Linux.
We have not said.
No. There's if you get IBM. IBM will work on that. If IBM believes this is a good thing for it to do as a corporation, it will. I mean, that's what they do. They figure out how to get their ideas into the Linux community, and it's both a sociological.
So don't pick Linux. Pick another system.
Well, Apple.
Well, no, it's going to be on a PDA. It's going to be on a cell phone. It's really going to be very pervasive if you succeed.
Sony PlayStation.
I mean, but you can look at that is whether the system identifies whether it's crappy Linux, or whatever, or good IBM Linux, so that the other people can say I trust that or I don't trust that. Does it tell you whose implementation?
It does now. Yeah.
If it does, then the sites might not accept stuff from the bad implementations, and they might accept stuff from the good implementations.
Yes, that could work, but
except how do you, as you say, how do you make that secure? That's really hard.
If it's not a secure site, it's going to lie like hell, right? Hi, I'm from gold-plated NSA secure Linux, and second, you're going to piss off a lot of people if you blacklist them.
Well, you might have to.
I mean, this may be
We haven't sat down and role-played this. Sorry. Yeah.
This may be an area where there needs to be some kind of, welfare effect, some kind of social safety net, right? I mean, think about the credit card industry. It's an area where we acknowledge there's lots of fraud, and so we've created another framework that mitigates what's the potential harm from. And I do think that, the certificate issue is an area where you get into, I don't, it would be nice if Microsoft could make sure that this whole environment was safe, but you can't, right? And so I do think it's an area where technology isn't going to solve the problem. Microsoft can have the best business practices in the world, and independently they're not going to solve the problem. So the question is, how far can you go, and then what do you need to fill the gaps? So I think, otherwise you are put in this position of choosing between two really unattractive scenarios. How unattractive? I don't know. Depends on what the worst case is. But
the more pervasive it becomes, the
but this sounds
more
like
liable that you are to these weak
But
players.
Doesn't it seem like this is like other versions where they're like standards efforts or something like that, where you need to get stamped with a symbol that you fulfill this thing rather opposed to just declare?
That's one instance of Deidre's solution, but there are other. It doesn't have to be. It could be a government stamp. It could be. I mean, there are many ways to package it.
It may be. One could try. I mean, I don't. We have to ask our friends who understand the legal issues, but I don't know if this makes sense or not. But it may be possible to tie the licensing to a minimal set of requirements.
But you remember what happened when you tried to license some stuff last time?
Well, if somehow it were done through a standards body.
I like Deirdre's
Virgil
analogy.
also. Virgil, you had your hand up, didn't you?
So one approach to working with flaky, platforms such as Linux, for example, in terms of credentials, is to do what people normally do in the commercial domains. If I don't really trust your identity, I ask you for another piece of information. I don't trust your driver's license, I ask you for a credit card, or I ask for your birth certificate. Or is there a way to actually increase this demand for evidence fairly dynamically? There is a whole body of literature nowadays, by the way, which
yes, that is built into the system.
About they call it trust negotiation, where in fact, if you come to me as a server, I can actually demand more credentials from you than if, say, Dave Patterson comes to me as a server. So there may be a way to sort of mitigate some of these problems with some of the platforms which are not as secure as yours, and still accept credentials from them.
Okay, that's very interesting. And that ability to negotiate up requirements is built in. But we've never thought of using it in the way that's being suggested.
So as soon as this thread is over, I'd like to ask a different question, so put me on your queue.
Great. Anybody else for
this
this?
Seems like other organizations have this problem, and kind of instead of doing standards, what they've done is whatever they call these things, where Intel and all the interested companies get together and form this cabal, and then they trademark stuff.
We prefer the word consortium.
Yeah, and then they trademark stuff, and then they won't let anybody claim they got it until they pass some hurdle, and they do this for
yes,
mouse or something, right?
Yeah, but when they do that, it's everybody wants to get in. You can't do that when you're trying to get everybody to want to get in.
No, but I just don't. It's hard for me to understand how you can do a thing where anybody in the world can announce that they can certify certificates without any hurdle.
Right.
I don't understand.
Well, I mean, I presume that I advocate the solution that you can announce it, but in order to do it, you have to interact with something higher up in the food chain, and you make sure there are those things higher up that everyone is prepared to trust.
So it's kind of dynamic standardization, or
well, once again, if you have this model, a sort of free market model of identity providers, the identity provider, higher value identity providers, they might in fact look at the hardware you're running on and make that part of whether they're going to issue that identity. So in that sense, that may be the best way to address those things, is to push it onto the identity provider.
Right.
Just like, for example, Microsoft.
They have a business model to do it well.
Yeah. Yeah, and like if you look at Microsoft, and here I'm talking about it as an employer, they don't allow you to run a piece of flaky, well, anything flakier than our own product. They're in effect setting a minimum bar. Sorry.
I just wanted to pick up on. I just wanted to pick up on Deirdre's analogy to sort of the liability the customer has with, say, credit card fraud. Now we're talking about something more than just financial damage to a person, but like identity fraud, if you will. If there's and outside of technical solutions, if the legal system or societal system can create
an insurance.
An analogy for right, exactly.
Identity insurance.
Right, and then you get all the other players on board. There's still the
That has been proposed.
Okay, that's good. I mean that
not by us, but by this Identity Commons group has proposed this idea of effectively identity insurance.
Yeah. I think that you'll get more customer willingness.
And I think that's one of the good things that we're seeing is sort of more people from the legal profession, the other professions, helping solve this problem. So it's not simply solved on a technical basis, but on a social basis. And that's the key to it.
Mike Schroeder.
So this is a moderately mundane question, but perhaps important to the usability of this system. It'll take a while for all of this to be adopted and spread around the world, and it's going to be a really long time where HTTPS protected websites are still having folks register their own usernames and provide their own credentials. Unfortunately, usually with site-specific, unique constraints on the formats of passwords and user IDs. Are you going to do anything to integrate keeping track of all of that crap with your system so that it's easier for users?
I don't know.
You mean to make a transition?
Well,
it's not going to be a transition. It's going to be a
tail. I mean,
it's a tail. I agree. It's a long tail, isn't it?
And you know, right now it's.
I mean, to live in a world, a mixed world.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what we do know is that a very large number of the internet transactions involving identity. First of all, a lot of the internet transactions do not involve identity. And a very large number of those that do involve identity are concentrated on a very few sites.
I must have 50 accounts with different passwords.
Yeah, me too. But
you have 50 different passwords.
Well, because everyone has its own rules about what a password looks like.
I'm more careful with some people.
You are conscientious.
We've thought about it, and let me tell you our thinking, and then you can. I mean, basically, there's two possibilities. One is that we compartmentalize somewhat and say, okay, there's a new world, and it runs at a different level of trustworthiness than the old world, and the other is to try and make them look continuous. And I certainly don't want to make them look continuous because you fall down this slope and you're just finished. I mean, now that doesn't mean you can't have point solutions that do things like password randomization and stuff like that across different sites, right?
What I want is the management of those account names and passwords.
I mean, here's
Under
one
a common
feature that
user interface.
Okay.
Here's one feature that today, if you have 50 passwords, you can put them all in one file, encrypt the file, and only have to remember one way into that file. That's what my parents did when they didn't know what else to do, and that was the best I could come up with. You could have that inside your protected space, so that for old-style solutions, here's a list of your old passwords, and it looks different, so you know it's not as good as using the cool system. And that way, all your other passwords are in that relatively safe part of the domain.
In fact, I don't want it in a file because it's not accessible to me everywhere that I log in. You know, I want it tied to this identity system, so if I'm in an airport kiosk and I can properly identify myself according to you, then it will log in for me to that site using the old credentials.
That's another step.
Right, and you know, it is, well, I mean, there are things, you know, SXIP and things like that. There are some very interesting things that could be, and I've spoken with the guys, you know, from SXIP about them being a gateway, if you wish, between our system and the existing web systems, because their stuff can be implemented on a website in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I think it is possible to imagine sort of gateways like that.
Well, I think you would get a lot more consumer acceptance if when you hit the market the first time, you have a solution to this problem. All of a sudden, you have made their lives better.
Okay.
We're running pretty close to Jeanette.
I was just going to say, imagining even further afield, that if your cell phone is really the keeper of your entree into all of this, then that ends up being a replacement for your wallet, period. And everywhere you go, even when you go to the supermarket, you'll be sort of entering, you know, Bluetoothing to the cash register or something.
Yeah. In Japan and Europe, you're already doing that.
So is that how you perhaps imagine InfoCard?
Definitely. I see the phone. I don't see people carrying, you know, with the current paradigms, you'd end up carrying around a pocket full of tokens, right? And you'd have to pull out and go, which one am I going to use here? I see the cell phone as being a much better way of doing that, but although it has its own problems of being, you know, it's a computer too. And, you know, we're seeing now more and more break-ins into the phone itself. So in a sense, I'm a believer in having multiple devices that have a information sharing system such that you need the combination for it to work. If you really want, to be protected.
All right, people. We're going to back to Wood here.
Did I do all right? Did I pass my audition?
Yeah, we're going to have you back.
Well, you're a very tough audience, but I'd like to take you home with us. I would like to stick around in case I can just...